because there was not a single Black person in the show, but everyone was experiencing racial stress. My name is Anastasia. I am the founder and host of Black Star Reviews, and today I am reviewing Appropriate, which is written by Branden Jacobs-Jenkins, and it was produced by Second Stage at the Helen Hayes Theater. We are dedicating today's episode to the late, great James Baldwin, who is here behind me. You may have seen him there. James Baldwin was a writer, an activist. I also like to think of him as a lifestyle influencer for any Black person who's ever dreamed of escaping racism and running to Europe. It was easier in his day. We've since exported our American racism to France, so no place is safe. But he was born in Harlem, and then he died in France. James Baldwin, in his writing, wrote Black characters and white characters, like in his very famous novel, Giovanni's Room. And what I like about him, and the reason why I'm dedicating this episode to him, is because he understood whiteness in a way that he could explain it to other people, and white people were giving him awards for what he was saying, which was basically him calling them out in real time. In the time, he's saying, y'all need to get it together. And they're like, James, awards, we want to publish your books. And I think that is very talented. One of my favorite quotes by him, I'll read it to y'all. White people in this country will have quite enough to do in learning how to accept and love themselves and each other. And when they have achieved this, which will not be tomorrow, and may very well be never, the Negro problem will no longer exist, for it will no longer be needed. So the short version is, y'all don't love yourselves or you're taking it out on us. And this was published in the New Yorker magazine. The New Yorker published this. It was part of an essay, obviously. It wasn't just the quote. But they published that in 1962. And 62 was 6 years before Dr. King was assassinated. So he's, hot takes, mic drops, and they're like, James, we love you. Another thing that I think is fascinating about James Baldwin is he had this kind of a beef with Richard Wright. And it reminds me of the Booker T and W.B. Du Bois beef. It reminds me of the Lil' Kim and Nicki beef. Basically, James Baldwin was coming up and he really looked up to Richard Wright. But he was like, nah, I think he could be doing more. I have some critiques of his writing. And as a result of his critique of Richard Wright, and the essays that he published in critique of Richard Wright, who was his idol in many ways, they called him the most promising Negro novelist since Richard Wright. And I think the key to getting to the top, in the eyes of society, critique the person at the top until they tell you you're next up. I don't want to play that game, but if you are ruthless and you really got to get there by any means necessary, give it a try. If history is any indication, it will work for you. If you're still thinking I want to run to France like Baldwin, you should know that they demolished the house he lived in despite many requests to make it a historical site, possibly a writer's residence. And the people who tore it down, the French people, were like, we don't have to keep this. Nobody has ever heard of James Baldwin. So like I said, if you thought you could escape racism by crossing an ocean, think again. Crossing oceans is how we got racism in the first place. But we're thanking James for his contributions as a Black star. and also his friendship and the impact that he made on so many other Black stars. He was friends with Maya Angelou, Bobby Short, Miles Davis, Nina Simone, Josephine Baker, Ray Charles. They used to come by his house in France and parlay. And so we want to say thank you to him for his pioneering ability to say whatever compelled him and to expand the audience, whether that's his intended audience or the audience he ended up with. And we'll talk more about where that comes up in this show as I get into the summary and my thoughts. So thank you very much to James. Let's go ahead and pour him some water. And we'll leave that right there for him. All my life I had to fight to get tickets to this show. It was madness. It took months for me to get a seat to see this show. I have a small beef with Today Tix, the app. Like, Today Tix, don't at me. Like, we don't really have to fight. But your online rush system makes me want to pull my hair out. Like, the way it works is at 9 a.m., you have to click, rush ticket. And then basically what's going to happen is it'll tell you, all the seats have been claimed. And I'm like, how is that possible at 9? Like, I've been on the app since 8:58, waiting for the button to turn red. And as soon as I turn it, you say, no seats, no tickets. It doesn't make sense. Like, can I get a queue number? Like, I was number 128 to press the button, and that's why I don't get a ticket. Can I be on some sort of wait list, lottery system? But every morning I would wake up and I would try to get a ticket through this app, and I could not get one. This happened for Jaja's African hair braiding too. I ended up having to circumvent. I can't really tell y'all how I got the ticket, but just know it was gotten. But Today Tix, we need to talk. There's got to be a better system. If you want to just buy a ticket, all right, money bags, I see you. Prices start at $99, and that's to sit in the back of the back. So if you want to go up to the balcony, up to the I think it's a mezzanine, and sit in the back row of the mezzanine, that's going to run you $99. And keep in mind, most of the evening shows are sold out at this point. So you're going to have to catch a Wednesday matinee or a Sunday matinee if you can. People have been scrambling, clamoring to see this show. So it has not been an easy ticket to get. But you're welcome, because I love you. I pulled some strings. They're actually extending the run. No, just kidding. I don't have anything to do with this. But they're going to extend the run at a different theater. It's going to move to the Belasco, and it's going to play some more. So if you missed it at Helen Hayes, go see it at Belasco. And if there's anything I can tell you about this show, don't wait. Because if you wait, you're going to end up like me, and you almost won't be able to see it at all. The reason why I hesitated, even when I got the flyer months ago about this show, was because it had Sarah Paulson on the flyer. Now, I don't have an issue with Sarah Paulson. I think she's amazing in American Horror Story. But I was like, well, this doesn't really fit what I'm looking for, right? Because I review Black art. When I took a closer look, I realized that the writer of the show was Branden Jacobs-Jenkins. And I had seen his work before, and I am a fan. I saw the play he wrote called The Octoroon, which was at Soho Rep in 2014. And he won an Obie Award for The Octoroon and Appropriate in 2014, which is a huge deal. And side note, I know I've spoken to y'all about Obie Awards versus Tony Awards, but it just dawned on me that Obie is just pronunciation of O-B, Off-Broadway. I'm embarrassed that I'm this old and I'm just finding it out, but hopefully I've saved you some frustration and embarrassment. But anyway, he won the Obie for these plays, and I saw the Octoroon, so I'm like, I gotta see Appropriate. And if he wrote it, I'm gonna go see it. And on the note about the ads, the ads have Sarah Paulson in them, the ads have Elle Fanning in them, and for that reason, because the cast is an all-white cast, There's not going to be a lot of graphics in this episode. I use graphics in this corner to highlight Black stars. And so the only Black star we'll really be discussing is Branden Jacobs-Jenkins. So if you're like, where are the graphics? Don't worry, it's not budget cuts. It's not staff cuts. It's not a production issue. I just want to make sure that our graphics stay focused and that they stay on brand. So one other thing I want to talk about in terms of the context of this show is there's a little letter in it from Carol Rothman. And I'm going to read it to you. Carol Rothman is the president and artistic director of Second Stage. She's actually outgoing, so the spring of this year she'll actually be stepping down. I don't know how Carol meant it, but I'm going to read it to you. It's going to be a dramatic reading. I'm going to add a little bit to it, but you tell me if you hear what I hear in this letter. What is appropriate? As we were preparing to move into the Hayes, I reached out to a handful of talented writers to talk about commissioning them to write plays for Broadway. One of those playwrights was Branden Jacobs-Jenkins. We had a long conversation about what was a Broadway play, but ultimately, Branden wasn't able to accept the commission. Happily, although it's not a commission, we are now fortunate to be bringing Branden's work to the larger audience of Broadway at the Hayes. It only took 6 years. Carol, what are we getting at here? She also goes on to say, I think Appropriate is a funny, entertaining play, but explosive and filled with ghosts of our past colliding with our dangerous present. Another Second Stage play by a living American writer to provoke conversation. Let's have a conversation, Carol. What are you saying in this letter? What is the discussion y'all had about what was and what isn't a Broadway play? What were Branden's hesitations? And if you weren't going to tell us exactly what you were talking about, why just drop these little hints? I might be putting too much on it. These are all drama people, so maybe I'm adding the theatrics. Maybe I'm reading too far into it, but maybe I'm not. Would really love to hear from you all in the comments. Do you feel like this letter is shady, or I'm going too deep? I'm open to whatever you think. The summary of Appropriate. Now, y'all know that my summaries, I don't go into the endings because I want you to see the show and have an experience, so that the summary is going to be a little bit of a cliffhanger. But I will say, this play starts the way a lot of plays start, which is somebody who hasn't been around for a long time has come back. This fall, I saw 3 shows that all started that way. Pearly Victorious, Covenant, The Refuge plays. Somebody been gone, now they're back, so emotions are high. And in this case, even if the emotions weren't already high enough, the family is gathering at their dead father's country home, plantation house, to clean it out. So dad has been dead for 6 months and they need to get the house ready for estate sale, auction. They got to clean this house up and it's messy. So the family consists of 3 siblings. The mom has already been dead. So you have the older sister who comes with her teenage son, and she is a divorced school administrator. You may paint whatever picture you want to paint. That's the character that Sarah Paulson plays. You have a middle brother who comes to the house with his wife and his 2 kids, and he's a publishing guy from New York City. So my New Yorkers, you could definitely imagine this guy. And his wife is Jewish, so his kids are half Jewish, half white. And there's a younger brother who shows up with his girlfriend, and the younger brother is he can't do anything right. He's an addict. He's a classic black sheep. So these are the 3 main characters. The plantation house is in Arkansas, and none of the characters, these grown kids, they did not grow up in this house. This was just something that was always in their family. And now that their dad is dead, they're hoping that the house might be worth something. Because, people die and everybody decides this is a time to collect a check. The house has around it two graveyards. One is for white people, and it has like, beautiful gravestones, what you would think of in terms of a cemetery. And then the other one is for enslaved people on the plantation who died, and it's just unmarked graves. And there is a lake, which sounds a little bit more like a swimming hole, the kind of water that I would not get into. So they're getting this house ready for an estate sale. And while they're trying to clean up, they find something that may reveal some truths about their father and their family's legacy. And in the process of trying to untangle that, they learn, some of them learn nothing, but some of them learn a little bit about themselves. The set looks like the inside of this plantation house. You can see the living room, and then like the second level, there's a balcony. It's really a beautiful set and like a beautiful house. I feel like I've been in this house. It also is reminiscent of some of those like mini mansions in Atlanta that all the celebrities live in. The set does not change. You're in the house the whole time. The whole play takes place in the house. There's 2 acts, an intermission, and I do want to give you a heads up. There's some unsettling noises that I found unsettling, that are used to help the audience know when you're moving through time. Like time is passing and there's going to be an unsettling noise. I really felt scared, but everybody else seemed fine. So maybe it wasn't a big deal. My thoughts. I have four main thoughts that I want to get into with y'all, and I'm so grateful to Branden Jacobs-Jenkins for writing this play. The first thing is really just an acknowledgement of his writing. There were some beautiful lines in the show, and I wrote them down in my little notebook as I was watching. There's a part where he talks about, well, he wrote, but he's not speaking. Sweet girls grow up to become bitter women unless you save some of your sweetness for yourself. And as a person who feels between sweet girl and bitter woman, I was like, I need to write this down and take note of this for myself. Another character talks about an obsession and a thirst for violence. And the way the line is like situated in the play, as well as how it's delivered, it really hits and it lands on you. There's a moment where another character says, I know this land, and I went to see if I could find the trees, which is a beautiful picture. I don't think I could tell a tree from another tree, but I like thinking about the possibility of being able to do that. And trees actually hold a deep importance in this show. And the only way I think I can explain that without giving the show away is like family tree, right? Like there's a tree motif, I think, in the show. And the last line, which came near the end and really just made my heart like crumble. There's no one left in this family who held me. Again, I can't get into it without giving the show away, but beautiful, beautiful lines and beautiful writing in this show. So that's my first thought. The second thought is about white people. The show is all about white people. It's cast entirely of white people. And the audience is all white people. And they love this show. They were laughing at this show as if it was a comedy of errors. Sometimes I see the ads for this like off-Broadway show called The Play Where Everything Goes Wrong. And I've never seen it, but they were laughing in this show as if they were watching that show. And meanwhile, I'm horrified. Like things are happening and I'm like, people around me. Woo, scary. But that's only part of what I want to say about white people. There are in this show some archetypes of white people or archetypes of white privilege represented in this show that actually represent a diversity of opinion, a diversity of competency, cultural competency, a diversity of acknowledgement of privilege. And none of these characters are perfect because you're not perfect and I'm not perfect. I know, shocker. So all of these characters have flaws. When I get into these archetypes, please don't take it personally. We're talking about characters on a show. They might remind you of someone you know, but I am not talking about you. You're not in the show. These are just characters and in some ways caricatures. So the first archetype is, you know her, the miserable white woman who refuses to acknowledge her role in a racist society. And she's always a victim. It's never her fault. Like, this is the kind of gal who would have gone to the feminism march with the pink hats and, like, also in her same breath telling you about how she marched for women, make the assumption that most of the people who are on welfare are like single black moms, which is not true and is racist. So it's like, on the one hand, you're a feminist, but on the other hand, your type of feminism is really confined to a white bubble, a privileged bubble. So that's one archetype. The next one is the corporate father who has no interest in ethics. Like, morality is not important to him. What's important is to not get canceled. So he just wants you to tell him explicitly, what does he need to do to not end up in the Times, not end up on the internet? But he doesn't care from like a deep place. He just cares from like a status reputation place. Now, this archetype is married to an archetype of a Jewish woman who is straddling whiteness and non-whiteness. And like, there are a lot of Jewish people on TikTok and the internet who talk about this, how they feel trapped by their proximity to whiteness, but also the fact that they are separate. Sometimes they see themselves as separate. Sometimes other people are telling them they're separate. And in some cases, they feel proximate and like they have almost a front row seat to the dangers of anti-blackness. And in this show, racism is almost a character in the show, but there's nobody besides these white people in terms of a character in this show. But this archetype of this particular Jewish woman, it reminds me of that poem that people quote a lot, where it's like, first they came for the communists and I did not speak out because I was not a communist. Then they came for the socialists and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. ... It gets to the end. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak out for me. So that was written by a German pastor. He was talking about the Holocaust. And so this Jewish woman in the show, she's almost like an embodiment of that sentiment, because when some of the racial discussions are happening, she's listening both as a white woman and also as a Jewish woman. Very interesting character. Next archetype, the teenager who mindlessly emulates harmful behaviors because that's what he sees the people around him doing. Teenagers, and I was a teenager once, sometimes they have very strong opinions, very little amounts of fact to back it up. Like, they know how they feel, but they don't know why they feel it. And it's mostly because, speaking as a former teenager, people who I thought were cool, I just did what they did. Like, I was like, we've got to save the trees. I didn't have a reason why. Just thought it was a cool stance to take. The next archetype is children. Children who are constantly responding to cues from adults to teach them what is right from wrong, what is moral to immoral. They don't know. They're just watching you to find out. And there's a moment where one of the children says, "But I don't feel upset. Am I supposed to?" And I find that's perfect, because we teach kids when to feel upset. We teach them when to feel embarrassed. We teach them when to feel left out. And sometimes those feelings arise on their own, but sometimes we tell them, oh, if you end up in a situation where you're picked last for the basketball team, you should feel embarrassed and excluded. Because when we read books, we ask them, oh, what do you think the character is feeling when they were last for the basketball team? But it doesn't say how the character felt. Maybe they didn't want to play basketball. Next archetype. I loved this one as well. The spiritual person who's mocked and laughed at for leading with the heart instead of the mind, right? And this person is so spiritual, so nonconformist, that they are seen by white people as non-white. but they are white. The next one, and the last one, is the archetype of a white man who is so caught up in his own web of pain and addiction and sorrow and regret, you can't even have a conversation with him about racism. You can't even talk to him about hierarchy in society because he really feels like he is at the bottom and he has nothing going for him. All of the characters in this show, like I said, none of them are perfect. Even the ones that I like, even the ones that I found interesting, all flawed. And the flaw that they all share, in addition to their unique flaws, is that they all express a desire to capitalize on their family's past horrific behavior. Once they get to the bottom of the horror, they shift to, well, how can we make money off this? Which I think is disgusting. And that's kind of the point of the whole show. I'm truly impressed. There is a main character, but each character has development. They all feel so rich. Every character, except for the youngest child, there has an arc. And I think that is masterful and so detail-oriented that we get to see each of these archetypes in a very prismatic way. The archetypes, because of the way they're written, because of how multidimensional they are, they remind me of people I know, people I've met, people I've worked with, neighbors, past, present, future, teachers I've had. It feels very realistic, like you could pop somebody from your life into this show and it would still make sense. And it's another indication of Branden's talent, the way that he can write quiet racism and like the in your face, we don't like you racism. He is writing about racism and the way white people are impacted by racism in a way that white people find funny. They keep buying tickets to the show, right? They like the show. This is not a happy show, but they keep showing up and laughing. And I think that is talent. That is how you pull in an audience. That's how you sell a show. And it reminds me again of Baldwin with the idea of like double consciousness. I had to take a diplomatic trip to Canada a few years ago. And I was not really looking forward to it. Because I was like, Canada is not even, like, Canada is up the street from New York. What am I going to learn in Canada? What's going to be, like, cool or new in Canada? And a Canadian person told me, you think you know everything about Canada. In reality, Canadians know everything about you. They know your president. They know your foods. They know your music. They could tell you anybody in political office, probably in the city where you live. Name anybody from Canada that's not Drake or Celine Dion. I was embarrassed because he was right. And I think that Black people have to understand whiteness to survive. And Branden understands white people in a way that is on another level, on a Baldwin type level. I am not on that level. And so I thank him for his work. Next thought. To me, Black art is anything that a Black person made. If a Black person made this art, it's Black art. There are some artists who are Black who will say, I don't want to be a Black artist. I don't make Black art. And I respect them. I'm just sharing my definition. Now, this show is Black art because Branden wrote it. My question is, what makes a Black story? We know it's Black art, but is this show a Black story? I want you to see the show and decide for yourself. Like, is it, if the writer is Black, it's a Black story? If the actors are Black, like the characters are Black, it's a Black story? Is it the subject matter? Because once you have your answers to those questions, I have some follow-up questions. Is Porgy and Bess a Black story? Porgy and Bess is seen as like the first Black opera. Nobody writing it was Black. it did give a lot of opportunities to Black performers, classically trained Black performers, in an unprecedented way. It's tragic and it's dark. Is Porgy and Bess a Black story? What about slave play? The playwright is Black. The director was Black. About half the cast is Black. It's about interracial dating. Is that a Black story? American Son. It's on Netflix. You could watch it with, I think Kerry Washington is in it. She was on the stage when I saw it downtown. It's about police brutality against a mixed race child. The child is half Black, half white. The play was written by a white person. Is it a Black story? And that brings me back to James Baldwin again, Giovanni's Room. It's a story of two men who are attracted to each other. There are some complications. They're white. Baldwin wrote the story. He's Black. Is Giovanni's Room a Black story? And once you have your answers to those questions, then I ask you, is Appropriate a Black story? Blackness is present in the story. A Black person wrote the story. There is not a physical Black person in sight. Black people's feelings and emotions are not mentioned in this show. They're left to the viewer. My answer is that the way this show is left unresolved is what makes it Black to me. I think if someone else had written this show, they would have resolved the ending, right? Family, racist hijinks, everybody's okay, right? We atoned. But I think that Branden made a very deliberate choice by leaving the ending unresolved and ending with a symbol. And I cannot tell you what the symbol is, although I have dropped some hints throughout the episode. But the way the show ends, honestly, is what makes it Black to me. But I'm very curious if you all see this as a Black story. And I might actually have to make like a whole nother episode to get into Black art, Black story, Black storytelling, because it's something that I think about a lot. My last thought is about family curses. My family is from Mississippi, and I don't play about curses. And I don't play about roots, and I don't play about hexes. That stuff is not a game to me. It might be a game to you. But when I see shows that explore generational pain, generational trauma, generational wrongdoing, I can't help but think, y'all might be cursed. This family in this show, they might be cursed because of some stuff that they did. It wasn't right. And when you do clownery, the clown comes back to bite. Now, I said earlier that one of the characters talks about the thirst, the obsession for violence. And when you have a thirst or obsession for violence, it will play out with whomever you can take that violence out on. During the time of slavery, people could take their violence out on people they felt they owned. Now, slavery is no longer legal, but you still have people out there who need violence, who are obsessed with it, addicted to it. And who do they take it out on? The people who are there with them. And I think about Baldwin saying that there will be no Negro problem when white people learn self-love and self-acceptance. Because there was not a single Black person in the show, but everyone was experiencing racial stress. I want this family to get right. I want them to atone so that their future generations can live in peace. Everybody in this show is tortured by things that their ancestors did. Get right. Get right before you get in the ground. Those are my thoughts. It's time for the grade. I am giving Appropriate by Branden Jacobs-Jenkins 3 Black stars. This show navigates whiteness in a way that resonates with white people, based on what I was hearing in the audience, as well as me, one single Black person. I appreciated how this show explores racism without subjecting us to watching it. There was no black body on the stage being harmed. And I appreciate that as a black viewer, because sometimes when people are trying to talk about race, they just start beating people up on stage, shooting people, leaving people on the ground. And I'm like, this was too much. Like, I get that you're trying to make a point, but you have hurt me in the process. And I don't think I was the one you were trying to hurt. The show also opens up conversations about what we tell our children regarding American racism and their participation in it. I said before when I did my Sunset Baby review, if love is the revolution, you need to start at home. So if you are trying to be anti-racist, you need to start at home. What are you teaching your kids? What are you reading to your kids? How are you reacting to racism in front of your kids? And I think people need to be having these conversations. And this show explores it in a way that I think really invites white people in, makes them feel safe, but also hopefully leaves them with some questions and some new behaviors. Who would I take to this show? I would take a black person who can compartmentalize. Because I will admit, it was difficult to be in the theater watching the show. I'm gasping. People are laughing. And then when it's time to leave, I'm like, oh gosh, I don't even really want to look at people in the eyes because I had a very different experience with this show than y'all did. I would take a DEI practitioner. I think they would get a laugh out of it because this is a lot of what they do. Listening to racial hijinks and having to tell people, hey, no, that's not okay. We don't do that. This is why nope, stop saying that. We actually don't need to use that word. So I think they would enjoy it. I would take a hoarder, a northerner, anybody who's a Yankee, an aloof teenager of any race. I would take any white person. I think they would enjoy this show, if the audience was any indication. I would also take a historian or an archivist. I think they would appreciate this. And I should give a warning that this show contains racial slurs, mostly toward Jewish people. So just keep that in mind when you go into the show with who you decide to take and any sort of like preface you might want to give them, because it might really catch them off guard. Where would I go after this show? I already told you I couldn't look people in the eye on my way out. So I would get out of Midtown. There's no place that I think I would feel safe to really process this show in the Broadway area. So just go to Harlem, go back to Brooklyn, shake it off, eat at home. Like you don't need to have a drink after this show. You need to go on about your life and find a little bit of joy. And that is my review. Those are my thoughts on Appropriate. Thank you so much to Second Stage and Helen Hayes Theater for having me. And if you are interested in hearing more theater reviews, more about Black art, please, you can like this video, you can subscribe to my channel. I have another review coming up very soon for Jelly's Last Jam. I just saw it last night, so I'll be recording that episode sometime soon. You can follow me on TikTok for mini reviews, Instagram, where I have pictures of like the theater, the sets, me there at the show, in case you want to see that. And remember, if you go see this show, please tag me in your photo, or at least use the hashtag. So it's at blackstar.reviews, or you can use the hashtag blackstarreviews. I would love to repost you, and I also would love to hear what you think about the show, whether you think it's a Black story, whether you think Carol Rothman is being a little bit messy. Let's have a conversation, as Carol would say. But thank you so much for watching and tuning in. I hope to see you again on my channel. In the meantime, Black love and starlight. Love y'all deep. Bye.